So we said, maybe this is a disorder that we can treat. Maybe we can do something about this. So we started asking more questions. We started asking, well, is there a way that we can have our bacteria sense when you're sick? Is there a way that we can have our bacteria treat it when you're sick? Is there a way that we can introduce the bacteria where it's not going to cause more problems? And finally, as we were asking questions, we arrived at one final question that opened the doors for all of the rest of the work that I ever did. That final question was, can the bacteria Escherichia coli sense and detect inflammation in a mammalian gut using the nitric oxide sensor NOR-R? It's a very long and it's a very complicated question, and if you guys didn't catch all of the words in there, that's perfectly okay. What it basically means is, can my bug, my E. coli, sense when you're sick using this sensor? That was it. And the reason that we had to ask that specific of a question is because that is a question that you could design an experiment to answer. So you start from something very, very big, and you narrow it down, and you narrow it down, and you become more and more specific as you go, until you finally have a question that you can answer. And that's what you start running your experiments on. And that's part of the creative process. It took creativity, and it took a lot of hours of thinking to try and figure out where's a place where we could actually use a bacteria to be helpful. Where's a disorder that this would be useful? So what I want to talk to you guys about is questions, right? That's what we're here. We're doing a book of questions, right? And what I wanted to tell you guys is that even though it sounds like science normally is this separate subject, right? You have history, and you have math, and you have English, and you have science. Science really isn't separate from everything else. Science is part of everything that we do all the time. So how many of you guys play sports? Anybody play sports in here? Any martial artists? Martial artists? Awesome. What martial art? Taekwondo? Jiu-Jitsu. Jiu-Jitsu. Oh, wonderful. This is the first time I've asked this question and somebody said judo or jiu-jitsu. So, in judo or jiu-jitsu, you learn how to do a lot of different arm bars and things like that, but a lot of it, you also learn throws, correct? So you learn like ogoshi, the hip throw, and you learn a lot of other throws. So how many of you in the room do you think could throw me across the room? Raise your hand. Okay, the answer should be every one of you. Because if you ask the right questions and you use the principles in force and motion and physics and learn about center of gravity and learn about getting somebody off balance and using their weight against them and using their motion against them, every single one of you would be able to, with the right training, throw me across the room. All right, how many football players? Any football players in here? No football players? Nobody's wearing a tie, I guess. So that means we got one. Okay. Oh, gotcha. Okay. So in football, we were talking about earlier that if you're trying to figure out what's the perfect way to tackle somebody, that you can start asking questions and running experiments in your football practice. So if I'm asking, what's the best way to tackle somebody? Do I hit them from the front? Do they hit them from the side, from the back? From an angle at one of those? Do I hit them high or low? Do I hit them dead on center of mass against center of mass? Or do I try and hit them at an angle so that they spin while I'm trying to take them down? Like, there's all sorts of questions that you can ask. But the best part about it is that you can answer them. You can get 10 of your buddies together and put on your football pads, and you can hit each other all day long. You can practice your tackles and figure out which one of them works the best. But the best thing is, or the important thing is you need to write it down. You need to take your notes. You need to actually have the data. When I hit him dead on, he didn't go down for 5 yards, or he didn't go down for 3 yards. You have to actually write down your observations, and then you can go back and analyze it. But it's a really good thing for you to study. All right, let's try another subject. Who likes superheroes? Who's a big fan of the Avengers or Iron Man or the X-Men? Okay, got a lot of them. A lot of superhero fans in here. The reason I bring up superheroes is one of my hobbies in science is I like learning about animals that have superpowers. So in college, when I went to college, I got my PhD. I don't know how many of you guys know this. If you go to college, you get your bachelor's degree. If you want to go for a PhD or your graduate studies, you go to graduate school. So it's another several years after college that you go to school. And for me, it was during my undergraduate that I started having my love of animals with superpowers. I worked in a lab with an electric fish. And when I say an electric fish, do you guys know what an electric eel is? Okay, so I didn't work on electric eels, I worked on a different guy. A weak electric fish. A strong electric fish, like an electric eel, can do what? It can electrocute you, yeah. These are animals that produce electricity at such a level that they can kill another organism by shocking them to death. They can stop their hearts. That's pretty crazy, right? What would we call it if a human had that ability?
Superpower.
We'd call it a superpower, or we'd call them a mutant, or we'd call them, a superhuman, right? So that's one superpower for these electric fish. Now, here's another thing that's weird about them that you might not know, is that electric fish can use electricity and send out electric pulses into the water to talk to other fish. They can figure out what species of fish is around them. They can find their prey using electricity. They can tell what gender another fish is. They can communicate using nothing but their brains and electricity. Now, if you think about that, that's like the best cell phone ever, right? They've had it for millions of years. They can communicate with telepathy, right? So that's 2 superpowers, 1 fish, right? Here's the number 3, is that they can regenerate like champions. If you chop off their whole lower third, they will grow it back. They're like Wolverine. They have regeneration. So they have the ability to do electrocute things, the ability to communicate telepathically, and they can regenerate. That's 3 superpowers in 1 animal. That's why I got interested in animals with superpowers. But there's all sorts of other mutations or things that you can find in animals that we would call superpowers if we saw them in people. So, like I said, one of them is taking Greek mythology. That's what I ended up in for genetic engineering. You can do all sorts of science and all sorts of studies in force and motion and math applications in sports. For biology and health and wellness, there's all sorts of things that you can study in mutation. So one of those, do we have the?
Yeah, if there's the arrow there.
Oh, this is going to be awesome.
Oh yeah, hopefully. Oh, keep going.
Oh, what kind of questions would the scientists ask? All right, so what I've got up here. Oh, I love this picture. Can you send me this thing?
Yeah.
Because I haven't seen this breakdown before. Everybody has an idea of what dog racing is, right? It's dogs and they race. So just like in horse racing or in a lot of other things where animals are competing in sports, it's very common. If you want to get a better racer, what do? How do you get a better racer for the next races?
You breed.
You breed. So who would you breed together if you were racing dogs? You'd breed the winners, right? Exactly. So in dog racing, these are called whippets. So this is what a whippet normally looks like. You see how it's this really skinny dog. It's got these very slender legs, very skinny neck. Looks kind of like a greyhound. In dog racing, any mutation, because of the intense selection that happens at those top levels in dog racing, any mutation that would give you an advantage in your running, anything that makes you run stronger and longer and faster, would make it more likely that you would end up as a champion, right? Now, as you continually breed those dogs together, what ended up happening was they started getting dogs that looked like these on the far right. So these dogs, compared to the ones on the left, they look like the Incredible Hulk, right? They're just absolutely muscle bound. I mean, there's more pictures that you can find of these dogs. They're just covered in muscle. And when you compare it over to one of these guys, I mean, you can see these ones' ribs. They've got very, very slender legs, very slender musculature. Now, what happened because somebody was smart enough to say, let's actually study what's going on here instead of culling these animals. So in breeding, culling means to put them down. Instead of culling them, they studied it. And what we found was that there's a gene that these top racers had. Do you guys know the difference between heterozygotes and homozygous? So if you're heterozygous for the gene, you run stronger, longer, and faster. It's a mutation that turns you into Captain America, okay? That's the way to think about it, is that it makes you have more muscle, it makes you much more fit. Now if you have a homozygous recessive version of that mutation, you end up as a muscle-bound dog that actually has so much muscle that it bends and warps their skeletons. So like their actual bones are being pulled together so hard while they grow that their bones don't grow straight. They're absolutely, completely muscle-bound. So they're not actually really good racers at all. They're too covered in muscle. They're not formed correctly. Whereas the heterozygotes actually do pretty well. They're incredibly fast dogs. But the reason that I bring this up, the reason why this is interesting, is there is at least one human being in the world that we know of that has the double homozygous recessive mutation that these dogs do. So anybody have little brothers or sisters in the room? Okay. Anybody ever, have you ever been around like small babies? How many babies do you know, like the second day after they were born, could lift their heads up on their own? It doesn't happen. They're very, very weak on the first days that they're born. They're very, very weak. They have to build those muscles up. This baby that has this homozygous recessive mutation for the gene myostatin is what they're looking at here. On day 2 was standing. Okay? That's how strong this baby is. Now, this actually is, like by the definition, he is a mutant. He's a mutant with a superpower. He's going to grow up and have super strength. He's about 5 years old now, and from what we know, he's actually doing exactly that. He's an incredibly strong, incredibly fit young man. Have you ever seen the Iron Cross in gymnastics, where they hold the rings out to the sides? It's an incredibly difficult maneuver to do. He's 5 years old and he can pull this off. Very, very strong kid. Incredibly strong kid. Frightfully strong. Here's the interesting thing about this. So, what do you guys know about like if you work out? So like if I were to work out and I were to get to be 300 pounds and I was covered in muscle and looked like Arnold, what would happen if I stopped working out for like 10 years? Where would all that muscle go?
Like, it would turn to fat.
Yeah, yeah. You use it or you lose it, right? You've probably all heard that. So the gene myostatin is actually what controls that process. So muscle is expensive for your body. It's really, really food intensive. You have to have a lot of calories to support muscle. So what your body does is it says, if we're not using it, let's start breaking it down and turning it into other stuff, because we don't need it. Myostatin is the key gene that does that. It's one of the key genes that does that. So what happens in these animals is that they don't start breaking down their muscle. They just continually build it over their entire lives. They get more and more and more covered in muscle because they can't break it back down again. Now, what's great about this is that there's a good quote that I really like in science.